humor, love, outside of a context of social change are entertainments. So the movie made me an entertainment. When I want to use love and humor, that people will stand up for love and humor and put on the shelf the love of money and power over.
Quisiera que me contara, para mucha gente que no conoce la historia, ¿cuál fue esa utopía, ese sueño de ese hospital que usted inventó?
I entered it with the idea to use medicine as a vehicle for social change. I already knew that our society was collapsing under a love of money and power, not only in what it does to its own people, but to people in every country of the world. So my idea, because I was a good student, I knew I would have a lot of free time. I studied the history of healthcare delivery, not only currently, but throughout history and all over the world. And the idea was to create a medical model that would address every single problem of the way care is delivered. Healthy history of science. Here is something a society needs, healthcare. And it is our job to give this healthcare to address the needs of the people. And so every single thing that my studies gave to me then created a model where we didn't charge money, where we had nothing to do with medical insurance, where we had nothing to do with malpractice insurance. These are heretical ideas for the United States, where we were the only hospital to mix all of the healing arts, where initial interviews with patients, instead of being very quick, completely meaningless explorations of this patient, we made 3 to 4 hour initial interviews to deal with the issue of burnout and to make the context of medicine fun. We made the first silly hospital in history. And most important for the patient, we realized in doing these long interviews what people from Tolstoy's time to the present have been writing about all over the world, and that is our adult humanity is most unhealthy by their giving up a love of life, a vitality, and a sense of privilege and gratitude for being alive, whatever their social position. So I found rich patient and poor patient, educated and uneducated patient, that whatever their x-ray or their laboratory showed, I saw 95% of our adult population having no idea what the love of life is about. So what did it matter if I cut out a tumor or corrected a blood pressure if their life still sucked? I thought I did nothing. 10 more years of a miserable life, am I to be applauded or cursed? And so from our very beginning, we wanted to mix medicine with real life by making our hospital a communal hospital. In a way, their disease was a trick to get them in a setting that we call a hospital that is in truth a university for human culture. So we mixed medicine with performing arts and crafts, agriculture, nature, education, recreation, social service. We used their disease of their kidneys to introduce them to friendship, to having a real meaning in their faith, to have a real experience with wonder and curiosity and passion and hope, not as words in a dictionary that one strives for, but as a natural experience when one wakes up.
Cuando traicionamos el amor, ¿de dónde viene el origen de estos males, esta idea de medicina, esta idea de sociedad, digamos?
It's a great question. And it's a question that whoever cares for humanity, and I'd like to declare at the front that my revolution is a revolution of care. Clearly. First things I started to study in my youth was primates. There are 5 great apes, and only one of them lives alone. The rest of us live in groups. The group comes first. We care first for the group. Intellectually, philosophically, the idea of the individual is very new to human history. It's no more than 200 years old, the idea that we are an individual, that a child should be specially cared for. These are new ideas. That before that, we were conscious of a group, of extended families was the closest to modern times. But for most of Homo sapien history, we lived in what a gorilla or a chimpanzee would be a group. Would never have thought of me. They would thought of a group. And this worked for humans, I think, until agriculture. The owning of land, my land. When the Native American people had Europeans come and say, we own land in Europe, the Indians said, how can you own land? God owns the land. It was inconceivable to the Native American, this idea of ownership of land, my land. And so arrogant, because the land is in charge of the land. Its drought or rain or what happens to the land is millions of years old. Not my land. And so I think the ownership of land led to this idea of arrogance over our environment. And hence, in today's form, we are headed for extinction for our complete disregard for our environment. The human environment, when we start having recorded history in the West, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years old with the Sumerian tablets, that we don't know what really happened from land ownership to this time. So when recorded history comes in, if we look at the Greeks, Herodotus and Thucydides, we see that they record history in terms of power over. Women have shown us, when the feminist movement came, that it was his story, history. And that story is stories of war, of leaders. Then, once the war has been won, it is a story of winners of wars, not losers of wars. And once you have a winner, you distribute the land most to the generals, second to the captains, third to the lieutenants, and the crumbs for the soldiers who actually did the work. And somewhere there, power over became the value system. And that makes sense if we look back at primates. In the gorilla or the chimpanzee, this idea of the silverback and the hierarchy of power. A wonderful Dutch primatologist, Frans de Waals, has written 6 great books on the chimpanzee. One, Chimpanzee Politics. The most interesting one is Peacemaking Among Primates, and saying, yes, chimpanzees fight in a hierarchy, but they always make up within a half an hour. As men lean towards the sword of power. And so we have machismo
Machismo, sí.
being the torch of power, and tenderness being the torch of love. And in power, you must only think of me in order to kill, because you cannot be thinking of us and kill us. So it made sense to follow power by saying me, because the mother says you.
Usted ayer en un encuentro con los jóvenes les dijo a ellos, ustedes quizás van a ser la última generación sobre la Tierra. Y les dijo que usted había investigado sobre esto. Me gustaría que me explicara ese diagnóstico tan apocalíptico. ¿De dónde tiene sus bases?
Move it away from this idea of apocalyptic, because so often this word is felt to be a philosophical apocalypse. I want to tell you I am reporting medical information. I'm not actually calling it an apocalypse. To give the metaphor in medicine, in the 40s and 50s, doctors found out if you have a strep throat and don't take penicillin, you can get rheumatic heart disease. It was the #1 heart disease in the world at this time from a strep throat. When doctors discovered if I give penicillin, I can prevent the rheumatic heart disease. At first, doctors did not want to do this. They said, how can a little sore throat, I had one last week, how can this cause permanent damage in the heart? But the connection was clear. The doctor's report was then to convince the patient and say, you have a strep throat. You need to take the penicillin. It is in that position that I want to talk about our extinction. Because it is not a philosophical conclusion. It comes from a scientific assessment of many factors. With rheumatic heart disease, we can have one factor, a strep throat. With extinction, we must look at many systems. The most fragile and the one most affected by our arrogance has to do with our environment. There is a huge body of literature that talks about global warming, completely ignored by our president. Because all of the problems causing the extinction are caused by the love of money and power, and always choosing the ignorance of money and power over the intelligence of scientific and social truths. 600-page book on the organochlorine industry. This is the largest chemical industry. To show how important this industry doesn't want you to know anything about it, they spend $130 million a year to keep you interested in Cindy Crawford and Brad Pitt and Pele or Michael Jordan. Because if you found out about that industry, let's hear facts that are available for all of us. 40 billion kilos of organochlorines are put in our environment every year. It means more than 11,000 chemicals. They have only tested 300 or 400 of these chemicals. everyone has been found toxic to human beings that they have tested. And they didn't test all 11,000. And that's just our environmental systems, isn't it? Let's go to our social systems, because I want to answer your question, because there isn't a second question than addressing our extinction. Let's take our social system. Last night at the university, I read one of your famous doctors, Enrique Accorsi, a list of things I asked him. I said, Enrico, tell me about the state of the health of the Chilean people. He would know. He would not want to exaggerate. He is a caring physician. We became friends on my last visit. He took me to Neruda because of our mutual love. On this list, may I get some of these ideas? These are in the social ecology of your people in Chile. How he divides the population into 5 different segments of the 20% that are poorest, the 20% that are richest, and in between.
De todas estas cifras, ¿cuál es la que le impresiona a usted más de la situación de Chile como médico, de nuestra
Of all
enfermedad?
of these things,
¿Cuál es la más grave?
the one that tells us that we will be extinct the most, your men beat your women. The world champions in domestic violence. And I want to look in the camera and tell these stupid men of Chile, you beat your women and you kill your future. You can beat each other, but when you beat your women, first of all, you show your cowardice because you know you can beat her up. And you need, because of how small you feel, to do this. You cannot beat your women. You are also world champions in beating and mistreating your children. Where is there a future? But let me tell you, in my condemnation of your beating your women, there is something greater beating you. Because you would not beat your women if you could end the difference between your rich and poor. If you could take care of your elderly and not give them wages that they cannot survive on. If you who had money saw it not as a way to have fancy vacations and BMWs, but to care for your poor, your women and your children. If care were the revolution, then you would not have to feel so small and so damaged and so humiliated by your unemployment and how unvalued you as a man are by your political and economic systems. You would not beat your women. Let me challenge you. In the macho revolutions, they have been revolutions around money and power. The communist revolution wasn't a communist revolution. It was money and power, meaning men, once again, and this has been true of these revolutions. They have been men revolutions. And the problem with men revolutions is that they like money and power. All right, let me tell you of some other revolutions that have happened that you did not include in your revolutions that are doing very well. Walt Whitman was a revolution in poetry.
David Thoreau también, es Thoreau.
Yes. But let's talk about Walt Whitman because we can relate it to a great Chilean poet, Neruda. Walt Whitman's poetry, not only in its form, but its content, was a poetry of revolution, influencing poetry all over the world and influencing people like me who believed, as Walt Whitman and Neruda both did, that the people are beautiful, that life is beautiful. Rich, poor, it's all beautiful. You can love all people. Walt Whitman has poems. I love the farmer. I love the mechanic. I love the carpenter. I love the priest. I love the beggar. I love the drunk. He has poems that say those words. And that revolution has been carried to the present. You're carrying it on your table here with a book of Neruda's poetry. So that revolution in poetry, all right? There have been revolutions in music. You know, Beethoven was a revolution in music as a romantic and gave possibility in music that will live as long as humans live. And that revolution is touching people today. Last night we heard a man say, "What makes you alive?" And he said, Bach. Bach was a happy man, happy family man. And his revolution is making me powerful for the revolution of care. If we had love, if we had a revolution of care, it wouldn't matter whether you were a democracy, a socialist, or a communist, because in care, all are cared for. They're all cared for, whether it's the people in democracy or people in socialism. The problem is, simplistically stated, men have always done the money and power, and the women have always done the work of love. With a few men being inspired by the revolutions of care, Christ and Buddha, and Walt Whitman and Neruda. But the real carrier of love and humanity throughout history has been our mothers. It was for me and for all people. That the real revolution in love have been mothers, but as we see in Chile, men beat their women. But where a nonviolent, think mother, think love, compassion, and generosity. If we refuse to accept the sword of money and power and men who beat women, what are our tools for our revolution? Ideas and actions. Sometimes you have to take a very simple or superficial step to try to make the big revolution happen. Like a wedge. To split a big log will happen from the fat part of the wedge. But the fat part of the wedge could never do it unless the tiny, 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 very sharp part of the wedge makes the first cut and makes the way for what will really crack this great piece of wood. The crack never breaks the wood. It is there to introduce the possibility of the fat part that will. So let's take the movie. If you see the movie and don't know Patch Adams, you think Patch Adams is the doctor of laughter.
Yes.
All right. That is the sharp part of my wedge. Right? And it was also all of my life the sharp part of the wedge. All over the world, everyone will shout, laughter is the best medicine. I actually think friendship is the best medicine, but we'll say laughter is the best medicine. So, a good revolutionary of love and compassion and generosity would say, oh, that's my sword. That's my sharp point. If I have a reputation of fun and funny and laughter, even the greediest, most violent person likes funny. They're never going to listen to my fat part. And so, the reason we had a kind of magic last night at the university that even overwhelmed me. I think it is on film. People should see it. It was love stood up. It was the fat part. The fattest part of the wedge is, of course, love.
Cristo ya lo dijo, ¿no? Que lo esencial es el amor. Es el corazón de su revolución. Esta nueva manera de hacer medicina a través de la risa y del amor produce cambios más importantes como los que producen los remedios o las operaciones. ¿Cómo llegó usted a esa conclusión y cómo vio eso empíricamente?
First, again, I must correct the language we are using. It's not new. It is only this dominant culture loving money and power who's completely ignorant of love and humor and compassion that thinks it is new. Whatever I have done in medicine was done to me by my mother. She was a school teacher who loved me and was fun. So it had nothing to do with new. It had to do with feminine power. I am nothing as a man except as my mother made me. That has to be heard. It has to be heard. We have to stop hitting and hurting women and children. We have to. There's no hope without it. So, all I did, when I was in medical school, there were no women in medicine. Men had power to prevent women from going into medicine, so I had to be a fake woman. I kind of look a little like one. Women wear colorful clothes, have long hair, and are friendly. So I was an infiltrator of my mother in my body, like a possession. Because what my mother did, and maybe your mother did, was that she made me. And so when I saw the injustice and the wrong behavior of arrogant, egotistical doctors who thought they had more power over the nurse and the technician and the parents and the children, I knew they were wrong. And I can give my 34 years in medicine is a constant story of that wrong and the constant truth of the power of love and humor. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was a medical student, I was in the emergency room and a family's child was brought in dead from an accident. When I was in training, never once did the male doctors ever mention the word love, ever mention the word compassion, ever mention anything to do with actual human exchange of something other than information and procedure. They did that very well. It was such a wrong direction. So, I had no training as another male doctor who was supposed to follow in those footsteps to what to do with this family. You know, I can tell them the child will go to the morgue and that maybe you need a prescription for a medicine to help you sleep. Completely ignoring that they just lost their child. They're weeping and they're going, well, maybe you need a sleeping pill for the sleeping and we'll be sure to take care of all the... So what did they teach me? Call the nurse, which means call the woman. They know how to deal with humanity. But I said, no, I'm not going to call a woman, a nurse. I'm going to be that. What do I have? One, I can have kind eyes. I can have a face that tells them something. Like my mother's face told me something. I have my hands to reach out and touch them. Then what do I have? What are the words to say? No education. The doctors didn't know the words. So I went to where it was easiest. I saw the family were Baptists, Christians. I'm not a Christian. But I know Christ. And I said, do you mind if we pray? They were shocked. The doctor said we would pray. I went down on my knees. I held my hands together and took all of my mother's love and what that meant, and it came out the metaphor of Christ's love with all the sincerity. For over 10 years, this family wrote me how that moment changed how they felt about their child's death in the power of love, in the form of the power of faith. From then on, when I was with a Buddhist patient, I was a sincere Buddhist. When I was with a Christian, a Christian. When I was with an atheist, I only needed to know...
Whitman.
Yeah, whatever. And so I started, much like a doctor collects a kind of pharmacy or a kind of treatment, I collected ideas and things that helped address suffering. I already knew humor and love were the big ones. Wonder, curiosity, poetry, music, they were helpers of love and humor. Love and humor were the great masters. And so I started adding that more and more. I started carrying toys in the pockets of my doctor's gown, and let's go many years later, when I started to take clowns to very poor countries that had no pain medicine. I remember a time, this was holy like last night, only it was all in one instead of a room of 1,300 people. We were right after Estonia got its freedom from the Soviet Union. I said, let's go to a country who just gets its freedom so we can taste this feeling. It was after 2 weeks of working 10, 16 hours a day in hospitals of poverty where they have no medicine for pain. So when a child has bone cancer, they just scream in pain. They just scream in pain, and the mother sits there faithfully loving them and stroking them while they scream in pain. It was the last hospital of the trip. It's impossible to say the fullness and feeling of joy of spending 2 weeks to take suffering. Well, I went into the hospital. I saw this mother stand outside of the door, and I saw her crying, and I knew the clowning was not for her, but what was behind the door. I walked through that door, and this was 7, 8 years ago, and I remember exactly like it was a movie you're showing me. And there was a young boy, 6 years old, named Rido. I never even hear this name before. And 3 women around, because most doctors in those countries, poor countries, a lot of them are women because men want to make more money, which is why they go into medicine in America, because they make more money.
Claro.
So 3 women were around his table. This was a burn hospital. He had 80% of his body burned. The tiny little face had no burns, and everything down to his knees was 3rd-degree burns. If you haven't seen what that looks like, you cannot look at it. Your eyes are not prepared. I'm a doctor. I could see that he was covered everywhere, ears burnt off, horror, except for this beautiful, unburned little part of his face. He was screaming, blood-curdling screams, which is why his mother outside the door wept like Mary wept. It's so hard for a parent to see a child weep so. And they were getting ready to change the bandages. And if you are to live through this kind of burn, you must change the bandages, frequently clean it, because infection will kill you, because your skin is your protection. An hour and a half it would take. And we just went in at the beginning. So I knew that they were ready for an hour and a half of the worst possible screaming. But these women, they were focused. They were not... Most men, if they were in the room, would leave. They couldn't even take the screaming, much less be focused to change these bandages. And they knew they had to make pain, because when you clean a wound, you take scissors and you cut skin. You can imagine if I take your skin and cut it with no pain medicine, what that would make you do, scream. And this was Rido's every moment. And I'm standing there as a father of a child of the same age, a doctor way back in the back of a clown's costume, weeping, going, what can I do for this boy? I see that they don't even have money for gloves for sterile technique. And so I abandon my scientific training and I go up to the boys. They move away for some preparation. And so I walk over to the boy and I look down and I see his face, and it was his choice. I could have scared him, okay? But in this time with this boy, the boy looked up at me and said in Estonian, "You're beautiful." I am his. And I went around to the head of where he was being worked on. I don't know what I did for the next hour and a half. I stroke his head and I say, "You're beautiful. You're beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to live. You're beautiful. You're going to live. You are beautiful." He didn't understand what I was saying. You know, I could have been, to him it sounded like, what did I care? You're beautiful. You're going to live. For the next hour and 20 minutes, he did not let out one scream. We were taken to the fat part of the wedge. Can I tell you, as a scientist, as a doctor, where we went? I don't have any idea. I can't make it. Love and humor make it. Like it made last night. I didn't make last night. Love took over. As it took over in that moment.
Usted fue instrumento del amor.
Exactly. Are those examples enough? Every human being who wants a revolution of care can make the personal decision that the moment they leave their house until the moment they return, every moment in the public space, they can make the personal choice to be universally friendly and a celebrant of life. In those two gestures that are free, they take no intelligence, they take no personal training, they take no money. And the reason it's harder than anything else is that you must step out of me and my hard life, me and my aging, me and my cancer, me and my lost love, me and I'm too short, me and I'm not good enough on the violin, me and the coffee I spilled on the shirt, and all of that me is placed on a shelf for you. For you, the citizen. For you, the woman who was beaten last night by her husband, but you don't know because she's on the elevator. Maybe you see a black eye. For you, the businessman standing on the elevator with a briefcase, who thought he had a secure job but was just told that the corporation in the United States cut his job here in Chile. For you, the poor person on the elevator who went to the social service office to say, I've got 4 children, how can you give me just $200 a month? Whatever. See, you don't know who those people are in the elevator. You don't know if they won the Olympic medal or they just lost their job, because none of them will have the courage to say on the little sign, I need your love in this moment. I need your humor. I need your celebration of life. They're not going to be courageous enough in a world that loves money and power to be so vulnerable. So you have to say, I'm going to take a chance. If you take a chance. If you say in every public moment, I will be universally friendly and a celebrant of life, you are Christ. You are Marx and Engels. You are more Mary. My favorite painting is by Leonardo da Vinci. It is his Madonna of the Rocks. Every time I go to London in the National Gallery, I go and sit in the National Gallery for 2 hours, I like to, and watch this look of the mother. Mary is not Jesus' mother. She is every mother, the universal mother. She is the simple gesture. The door opens on the elevator, and with your eyes sparkling and a smile on your face, because that's what happens when the door opens in the elevator. That's really what happens when you open the door and leave your house. The world is the big elevator, and the person standing next to you has injury.
Tiene herida.
And you are the mother. You are the Christ, the Buddha, the Neruda, the Walt Whitman. You are the child. You know, it's so interesting. Children could walk into a room full of murderers, vicious, horrible people, and play with them all uninhibitedly in love and tenderness, because they haven't yet been introduced to the love of money and power.
Muchas gracias, Patch, por haber estado aquí en La Belleza Pensar.
Thank you. And Christian, I want to say back to you, I have been on television and in the media for 18 years and never once felt the beauty of thinking. It was shallow and stupid. Interviewers asking me, who's trying to help people, what Robin Williams was like. That's their intelligent question. Or even stupider question. So I don't know why you're allowed to do this show. But whatever it is, keep courage.
Muchas gracias.
Keep knowing that it is only really through thinking that the decision for love will be made.
Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you.